This video is a massive PSA to all e-commerce brands, which is that Q1 actually has massive opportunity for profitability and scale. And the number one reason for this is because CPMs on Meta go down significantly during January and February. And the reason for this is that everyone pulls spend back considerably from November, December. Now, the second reason why there's a large amount of opportunity that lies within Q1 is because of the fundamentals that inputs equal outputs. One of the reasons why in January and February are some of the worst months for e-commerce brands throughout the period of the year, the same reason why September is one of the worst months as well, is because people don't plan. People don't plan to put inputs in place that's going to generate strong outputs, being your revenue and your efficiency during these months. Instead, you'll probably already put your forecast together and you've settled for a slow January and a slow Feb. If you're running the regular seasonality curve of a direct-to-consumer brand, you should not be doing that. Now, yes, you might be playing on hard mode in your off seasons if you have strong seasonality within your business, but that just comes down to better preparation around the inputs that are required to generate the output. And so when putting your forecasting together at the moment for January and February, I'd really be thinking about how you can maximize these CPMs that are considerably lower on Meta at the time, and then also how you can maximize inputs to be able to generate outputs. And let me give you a few of them in this video. So number one is actually going to be outside of paid media. And I'm going to put EDMs, and particularly EDM frequency. Something that's really common amongst the early stage 7-figure brands is that they'll just drop EDM frequency in January and February because they're on holidays. Everyone's starting to get back into the swing of things. The plan isn't there for the year in terms of what EDMs look like. Instead, I would recommend that if you want to have a strong Jan and Feb, you don't just continue your regular EDM plan, but you double it. I guarantee if you go and double your EDM frequency in the period of January and February, it will make a substantial difference to your returning customer revenue. Now, I would also suggest that rather than just doubling volume, you also double your creativity and your approach to strategy here as well. There are things that you can do with your existing customer database to significantly manufacture revenue that's going to outweigh the dip that occurs in these months. Number two is creative angles on Meta. And so because CPMs are so low on Meta during this period, it means we can place to a lot more people. However, we all know that conversion rates are generally lower in January and February. So despite CPMs going down, conversion rates also go down, and so expected ROI out of the ads doesn't really change. However, most people pull spend, and so expected total volume does change when you make a decrease to spend. If you are not maintaining efficiency whilst keeping spend relatively high in accordance with the CPM drop, then I would recommend, once again, introducing creativity into the angles and the approaches that you're using here. Now, one of the best ones, one of the most successful January approaches that I've ever seen is going for challenges. And now, the issue with this recommendation is it doesn't apply to every single brand, but it applies to a lot. You'd be surprised at how many businesses can actually put a challenge in place. But a really easy example of this, of a business that I have worked with for an extended period of time, is a weight loss challenge because they sell weight loss products. And so you put a 30-day weight loss challenge in place, you get some kind of discount code, or there's a bunch of different ways in which you could structure that offer to get acquisition into the challenge. And then there's obviously a prize on the other side, depending on who loses the most weight, who can stay consistent on the diet, who has the best transformational pitches, the list goes on. Now, that's a very obvious example. But if you get creative, and I'd honestly recommend leveraging ChatGPT or a large language model in this instance to see how you can translate this to your particular brand. But you can translate this to most businesses, okay? An example that wouldn't come to mind when you think of a January challenge is matcha. And I'm literally coming up on about this on the spot, which is that matcha, how would you put this into a challenge? Well, one of the value propositions of matcha that people like to use is that you use matcha instead of coffee, so you don't have as much of a crash. And so you could go into some kind of challenge around detoxing off of coffee. Okay, as a New Year's resolution, anyone that's looking to drink less coffee, buy our matcha. There's a 30-day free sign-up on a 90-day subscription, so they're already bought into buying 3 over a 90-day period, but 30 days is free. And then integrate some kind of accountability checkpoints throughout the challenge to make sure that people are holding themselves accountable to decreasing their coffee usage. Whoever has the biggest decrease or something, there's some kind of giveaway tied in there. This is honestly one of the most powerful strategies I've seen to counteract a January dip. Now, on top of that, there are other options too. And so you can do angles such as buy for yourself. Now, it might not sound like a great angle, but the whole angle that you're going at here is, and it depends on who your target demographic is, but this is people that have been buying presents for the entirety of November and December. And now you're coming in and saying, hey, maybe it's time you actually buy something for yourself. Seems like a simple, honestly, in my opinion, it doesn't seem like a great angle that would actually work, but we ran it on a lot of brands last year and it actually does work incredibly well. And so I definitely wouldn't write off that as a potential second creative angle that you can approach with. Some other options here is, and this is where you need a lot more foresight in terms of your planning, but you can do some kind of activation, which can be propelled through paid media to actually decrease your acquisition costs on direct-to-consumer. And so this might be a pop-up or something of that nature. And then a fourth one would be a product launch. Once again, this is one of the best ways to manufacture a revenue peak in a down month. However, this takes 3 to 6 months of planning. And if you're watching this video, probably too late already. So I'm actually going to scratch this one out, but it's worth thinking about for next year's planning in 2026. And then the very last thing worth noting here, when I say that Q1 has a lot of opportunity, is that there's also opportunity that lays here in an analysis. What I mean by this is you've just come out of Q4, where you likely had the highest media spend that you've probably ever had in the history of the business. Unless you're a declining business that's shrinking, this is probably the highest spend you've ever had. Now, with that being said, this is the most amount of new customers you've likely ever acquired, and that's probably the first thing that you're thinking about. But it's also the most amount of data you've ever collected. And so what that means is there is a massive media buying analysis piece here that is valuable for you to go and take a look at all of the data, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars of spend here, and figure out what creatives worked, what didn't, why. Now, when you do a creative analysis like that, you want to make sure you're doing broad strokes rather than fine strokes. You don't want to look too much into the details of creative because it's very hard to predict on the top 10% of creative which one is actually going to perform. But instead, you want broad strokes. So what creatives performed terribly, what creatives performed fantastically, what was the clear difference between those? And let's take that out for future iterations in Q1 as well as for next year. Now, also, what worked well and what didn't? Did we do some kind of giveaway? Did that work well? Did we see that had profit contribution? Have we done the math? Have we pulled out the customer IDs to identify that off the back of the flows? Did we choose the right product portfolio? How did this compare to last year in terms of the discounting offer? And did we end up eroding more margin than we initially expected? There is a massive retrospective piece here to be doing for Q4 that's often skipped, despite Q1 being generally a very slow period in direct-to-consumer e-com, which opens up a massive opportunity to be able to do this kind of analysis piece. And so on top of the fact that you can actually have a very profitable Q1 if you maintain or increase your ADM frequency, and if you come in with very creative angles that allows you to maximize on how cheap it is to place on the platforms during this period, and if you continue to understand that inputs equal outputs, so you can't expect a good January if you don't plan for a good January. Planning is the first step, then it's execution, and then you get the outputs. But on top of all of that, this is also a huge opportunity for you to be able to do a data analysis on all of the data that you've just gone and bought through Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and put next steps in place for how you're going to better approach the ad account, better approach creative, better approach the overarching media buying strategy and performance marketing strategy for Q1, for Q2, for Q3, and then most importantly for Q4 next year. Having that document wrapped up in your calendar, ready to access as you enter into Q4 next year, is going to make a step change in performance of how you actually perform during that period.